everyone. Welcome to the Dole Institute virtual post-election conference. Our guest this hour is Mr. Fahrenkopf, who is the co-founder and the chairman of the Commission on Presidential Debates. Also an old friend of mine. Frank and I work very closely together. I worked for him as the national political director when he was the Republican National Committee chair back in the mid-'80s. Frank, it's great
good old
to
days,
see you.
The good old days, Bill.
Very good old days, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. You were a co-founder of the Commission on Presidential Debates. Can you kind of walk us through the creation, why it was created, and what you were trying to do?
Well, yeah, I think what you have to do is go back to 1960 when we had the Kennedy-Nixon debates. And then we went 16 years without having another presidential debate. After JFK was assassinated, there was no way Lyndon Johnson was going to let Barry Goldwater get up on the stage with him. President Johnson's attitude was that if you're a president and you allow someone you're running against to be on the stage with you, you're elevating that person to be equal to you. So he was against it. The next two cycles, of course, Richard Nixon was back, and after his experience in 1960, he was not going to debate. So it took until 1976 when Jerry Ford fell far behind Jimmy Carter, primarily because of his granting of the pardon to President Nixon, that they both agreed to debate. The League of Women Voters conducted the debate. It went well, except for President Ford. You remember, Bill, for a while there was wandering saying that those nations behind the Iron Curtain were in no way controlled by the Soviet Union. So that hurt him dramatically in a very, very close election. 1980 came along, and it was a very pivotal year for presidential debates because we had a third-party candidate. Under the rules of the League of Women Voters, in order to be invited to participate in the debates, you must have achieved 15% in an average of polls that were the leading polls at that time. When the first debate rolled around, 3 people met that 15% requirement. Governor Reagan, of course, he was invited and accepted. John Anderson was a congressman from Illinois. He was the independent or third-party candidate. He was at, I think, as I recall, 17% in the polls. He was invited to participate and accepted. And President Carter was invited. But President Carter said, hell no, I won't go. He refused to debate so long as John Anderson was going to participate in the debates. And of course, the point of all of that is, and with Lyndon Johnson and Nixon, you can't require a president or any candidate to participate in the presidential debates. There's no rule, there's no law that requires them to. And Jimmy Carter, of course, said no. Now, by the time the next debate rolled around, Anderson had fallen 12%. So he was not invited. Jimmy Carter then accepted. And therefore, in 1981, he had one debate that took place. The League again did the debates in 1984. But there was a great deal of controversy that came about because the League allowed each candidate to veto the selection by the League of who the moderator and panelists were going to be. Now, it's important to realize that back then, the normal format was you had a moderator and you usually had 3 reporters who would represent various elements of journalism. And they were the ones asking the questions. Well, because of the League granting a veto to both campaigns, 106 journalists were vetoed and were not allowed to come. Well, as you can imagine, the journalism fraternity was not happy with that outcome. And what eventually happened was that after the 84 debates, 2 independent study commissions were created. One was at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and the other was at the Center for Strategic and International Studies when it was located at Georgetown University. Now, both of those studies independently had groups of, there were politicians, there were people from academia, there were news and journalists, and so forth, looking at the whole process of how we elect our presidents. And they came to a number of conclusions. They were separate. One was 1 year ahead of the other. But one thing that they agreed on, and that was there should be created an entity that exists for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to produce the general election debates every 4 years. I was the chairman of the Republican National Committee at that time. Paul Kirk of Massachusetts was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. And he and I were asked by both committees, would we consider creating such a commission? And Paul and I got permission from our both national committees, and we created the Commission on Presidential Debates in 1987. And that continued for, starting with the 88 debates, we've done every single general election, presidential and vice presidential debates. The last one in Nashville that we just concluded some weeks ago was the 33rd general election debate that our commission has handled. And that's, we're a nonprofit. We take no money from the federal government. We take no money from the candidates or the political parties. We raise our money privately, and we've succeeded in all these years to hang in there through a lot of difficult times.
Right. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions just to kind of get into the details of presidential debates and have you explain it, because I think people don't know and don't understand this aspect of campaigns well enough. How is candidate participation determined, especially when you got a huge field like the Democrats this year or the Republicans 4 years ago?
Well, the requirements of being, and let me say that we normally, a year before the debates, Bill, we send out so that anyone who is running for president, and you know, over 200 people every 4 years file with the Federal Election Commission to run for president. So it's not just the Republican and Democrats and maybe a few others, but we submit and publicize where the debates are going to be, when they're going to be, what the format is going to be, and what are the requirements to get into the debate, to be invited. Now, what they are some are constitutional. Number one, you have to be 35 years of age. Number two, you must be natural born. That was put into the Constitution for a very specific reason. If you go back and read the history of, and great books, the summer of 1789, that really got into some of the details that ended up with the Electoral College and 2 senators from every state and so forth. But they were afraid, the founding fathers were afraid some wealthy duke or baron would come over from Europe with a lot of money and just come in and buy the election. And so they made it, you had to be a natural born citizen. Now, it's created some interesting circumstances. We never really had to deal with it except in 2008. In 2008, you'll recall that some people believed that President, or then Senator Obama, was not really born in Hawaii, but was born in Kenya. We also had a problem, in fact, about equal amount of mail and complaints with regard to John McCain, because John McCain was born in Panama on a naval base. His father was an admiral. Well, of course, we got through all of that, and both of them were signified to meet the requirements of natural born. Another interesting factoid that I came across just recently is when Barry Goldwater was the nominee of the Republican Party, he, however, was born in Arizona before it was a state. It was the territory of Arizona, so it was not a state. So both houses of Congress passed an act saying that Barry Goldwater was a natural born citizen. You must also be on enough ballots in enough states to conceivably win 270 electoral votes. Now, almost automatically, the Republican nominee and Democrat nominee are on ballots in every state. The last 2 cycles, 2016 and 2020, you've also had the Libertarian Party and the Greens, because in past cycles, they had won enough or participation in states that they were on enough ballots. Every state's different. That's how you get on. Some states, you've got to gather 50,000 petition signatures. Another state may require 500,000. So it's very difficult to meet that requirement if you're an independent or someone who is not of the Libertarian, Green Party, Republican, or Democrat. But it's doable, but it's hard to do. And then you must meet the requirements that the League of Women Voters put in place when they ran the debates in 1980, 1976. And that's what we call the 15% rule. And that is, you must meet the requirement about a week before each debate of having an average of 15% in the major media polls. And so that's how the selection process is made. And we always try as best we can, Bill, to distinguish our debates from the debates in the primaries. I mean, they are now, the primary debates for the past 2 cycles have been sort of been run by the networks who make a deal with the independent parties. And they almost make it with 16 to 17 people on the stage, with the audience being allowed to clap and yell and cheer. And as you know, we don't allow that. We try to keep it down. And so they're very, very different. But that's how you qualify now to be in one of the general election debates conducted by the commission.
Frank, the commission has utilized various formats through the years for these debates. How do you select the format that's going to be used for each of the debates?
That's one of the most significant changes that we made, Bill. As I indicated, historically, it was done with a moderator and 3 panelists who would take turns asking. I was always skeptical about that particular pattern because primarily reporter number 1 thought long and hard about his or her question to make it a good question, to also show how bright and smart they are. And they would ask the question, and each candidate had about 2 minutes to answer it. And then it was time, under the old format, to move to reporter number 2. Well, they may not, either candidate, have answered the question, reporter number 1, and there really needed to be follow-up, but reporter number 2 was not going to use his or her time in question to go back to follow up on reporter number 1's question. So I was always concerned about that. And so what happened in 1992, in the final debate that was held at Michigan State University, we tried an experiment. The first half of the debate was done normally. Jim Lehrer was the moderator and there was a panel of 3 reporters. The second half of the debate, we went forward with just Jim Lehrer as the moderator, with his ability to follow up the questions, with the ability to drill down and not just get these 2-minute, campaign style answers that really don't reveal to the public where they're going. And since then, every single one of our debates, since that debate in 1992, have been done with a single moderator, save and except for one. In 2016, at the town hall meeting, which I'll get to how that came about in a minute, we used 2. We had Anderson Cooper from CNN and Martha Raddatz from ABC. But every other one has been done solo. So, and that was a major change that was made. Then what happened in 1992, you might remember, Bill, that George H.W. Bush never liked the debates. He did not like the debates. And in fact, we had to cancel a debate that we'd originally scheduled because we couldn't get him to agree. They finally agreed on the Bush side to debate. What happened was the people who were working with the Bush team and with Governor Clinton's campaign and Ross Perot's campaign, the Clinton people went to the Bush people and said, hey, why don't we try something different? We and all of us have been up in New Hampshire and up in places where they use the town hall meeting format where you get to know the candidates. Why don't we agree to do one of them like that? So they came, all 3 of them agreed. They came to the commission. We said, all right, if you all 3 agree, we'll give it a try. And so the first town hall meeting took place at the University of Richmond in Southern Virginia with the 3 candidates. It was controversial. I'll tell you, right before the debate was to begin, and if you remember how we normally do these, there are bleachers. And it's almost like a theater in the round with the moderator and the candidates in the middle. And the people who were chosen by the Gallup organization, they work with us to find people who are undecided voters. We've had as many as 100 and few as 40, but they sit in those bleachers. Well, in that first debate, Barbara Bush came in with Doro, her daughter, and she sat up in the back of one of those bleachers. So I went around just to say hello, and she looked down at me. I said, Bar, how are you? And she looked down at me with that look that you may have seen it. When Barbara is not happy, she looked at me and she said, Frank, what are we doing here? This isn't the Oprah Winfrey Show. We're trying to elect the President of the United States. And I said, Bar, we didn't agree to this. Your people agreed to it. So I'm sure someone on their team got really chewed out that night. Another funny thing that happened there that that reminds me, one of the original people on our debate commission was Pamela Harriman, who at that time was sort of the richest doyen of the Democratic Party. And she was sitting off stage between Paul Kirk and I, and we had in front of us a panel that showed what every television station was showing. And you may remember that George Herbert Walker Bush looked down at his watch during that debate, and every single camera, every network had him looking at his watch. And Pamela leaned over to me with that wonderful English accent she had. She was married, you remember, to Winston Churchill's son, and she lived with the Churchills in London during the Blitz. But she put her fingers on my hand. She said, "Frank, darling, it's over, it's over." And she was probably right. That probably made the end of it. So those were made. So then we've used the town hall ever since then. Most of the people in the media hate it. But the interesting thing is, the average American likes it. It's their favorite when they see an average citizen who has the ability to ask a question of the President of the United States or the future President of the United States. So we have maintained it. But probably the most significant change in format came about at the first debate at the University of Denver in 2012. And that was between President Obama and Governor Romney. What we did is we took the 90 minutes that are dedicated to the debate, and we divided the 90 minutes into 6 15-minute segments. And the moderator was required within a week prior to the debates, and that was for the first debate and the last debate, not for the town hall meeting and not for the vice presidential debate. And to name the 6 general subject matters that were going to be covered in those 6 15-minute pods. So Jim Lehrer, as I remember, did foreign policy, the economy, education, whatever they may be. I don't remember them offhand right now. And then the understanding was that he would then, at the start of each of the 6-minute segments, ask a general question. Each candidate would have 2 minutes interrupted to respond, and then the moderator had the ability to drill down for the remainder of the 15 minutes to get real answers so the American public could be educated. And so we have done those 6 15-minute pods ever since 2012. So those have been the major changes in the format, Bill.
What considerations have the most impact on selection of moderators?
That is the hardest thing that we have to do. I mean, it is particularly with where journalism has gone in the past 8 years. I mean, you know, it used to be you could get a Jim Lehrer, you could get a Bob Schieffer. You had people who you knew, you didn't know whether they were Republican or Democrat, but they just stated the facts. You know, they didn't get involved in the political side of it. That has changed dramatically. And what we do is about 6 months out, we sit down and we sort of review who is doing what on television, who's writing the journalists who are following. It's got to be someone who's following the campaign. And we kind of monitor them. We watch what they're doing on their shows, what their monologues are, et cetera, et cetera. And then we do our best to choose those people that we think would be the best and be the fairest. I would say that we've made very few mistakes, in my opinion, over the 33 debates that we've done. Now, I must tell you that usually the candidate who believes he lost the debate or she lost the debate usually blame the moderator, okay? But absent that, I mean, the only really major debate problem was during 2012. It was Candy Crowley with CNN. We instruct our moderators that it is much different moderating a debate than just interviewing one of these candidates on your show. If you're interviewing a candidate and you ask him where he or she stands on an issue, and then it's different than what they said a week ago, you as an interviewer say, well, wait a minute, Senator, or whoever it may be, you took a different stance a week ago. How do you explain that? That's for an interview. The moderators in our debates are not to be fact checkers, right, online. This is supposed to be a debate. If that candidate has said something totally in opposition to a position on an important issue a week before, it's for the other candidate to raise it and for them to debate about it, not for the moderator to inject themselves and become part of the debate. Bob Schieffer once said, I know it's a successful debate if most people will go around and say, who's the moderator? So the moderator is not part of it. So it was very, very difficult, particularly this time. Of course, we knew we had to have diversity. We also had never had, up until this cycle, a primary Penn journalist, rather than someone who was on TV regularly. Because to be the moderator, you have a bug in your ear, and you're being talked to off stage by the producer with regard to how much time is being allocated, what has to be done. And if you're not familiar with doing that, working with that microphone from off stage, you wouldn't be able to do this job. But more and more journalists who work for newspapers and magazines are on more of the shows on the weekends, and they're used to it. And Susan Page, who has headed the political desk for USA Today for years, has been for the past year or so a regular on either Fox News or NBC and so forth. And she's used to working on it, great journalist. And so we picked Susan. We thought that if anyone deserved another shot at it, was clearly going to be Chris Wallace, who had done such a great job in the final debate in 2016. So we asked him back. For the town hall meeting, which is very much what they do on C-SPAN every day, we went with Steve Scully. We invited Steve Scully, who runs C-SPAN now, to be our moderator there. And for diversity, we came across and just fell in love with Kristen Welker from NBC. She's their White House correspondent, and she was just recently and congratulated, believe it or not, by President Trump when she was named the co-anchor for the weekends for the Today Show. And so those were the four that we ended up with this time. We were very, very pleased with them. Now, as you know, we only had 3 debates. We had to cancel the town hall meeting, primarily because when the first debate was held in Cleveland, the president appeared for what we call the walkthrough. And what we do is we close the hall down the day before or the morning of. This time it was the morning of. We throw all the media out, and each candidate comes in with their team. And we're there, the commission members who are there are with them. And they come through and they do mic checks. We have 7 cameras shooting them. We show how it's going to look, where their family is going to be seated, and so forth. President Trump came in and refused to wear a mask. And so through all this walkthrough situation, he didn't have a mask on. And he was dealing up close with some of our sound people, our lighting people, our camera people. And then he left. And a day later, he was diagnosed of having coronavirus. And you can imagine our crew, we have 65 people, or a regular crew, putting on these things. They were beside themselves that he had come on there without a mask and endangered them and so forth. Now, we had already started, Bill, trying to pick the people for the next debate was going to be the town hall meeting in Florida. And there were people who were contacted who didn't want to go on the stage with the president under these circumstances. Then the next day, the very next day, half the White House came down with the coronavirus. So we consulted with our medical advisor, which is the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland. And it was proposed that what we would have to do is we should do this one virtually. Virtually, because so many people are used to what we're doing right now, working with Zoom and some of the other media that you can do. And therefore, we announced that we were going to do it virtual. The president immediately said he wouldn't do it. He claimed, well, Joe Biden's going to be sitting in his cellar and he's going to have a teleprompter and people are going to be handing him notes. Of course, that's not the way it was going to be done. Wherever Joe Biden was and wherever the president was, there were going to be news media people there. There'd be people from the commission. There wouldn't be anyone reading off a teleprompter. But he said no. And of course, as you know, Vice President Biden immediately scheduled a town hall meeting. And then the president did a town hall meeting. I think he had maybe 5 million people who watched it. Fox was the only one who covered it. And if he had gone forward with the event that we had planned, even though virtual, he probably would have had 75 to 80 million people see him. So we only did the 3 debates, but that's eventually how it came about.
You referenced the president, mask, coronavirus. How did the commission, what changes did the commission make this year to adapt to the pandemic?
Well, thanks to the Cleveland Clinic, who we immediately contacted, and they were so gracious, not only to step up and with Pace Western to host the first debate when University of Michigan had to pull out. Michigan had to pull out for a number of reasons. They have a hospital on campus. It was full of coronavirus people. One of the things I didn't realize, Michigan has 45,000 students. 8,000 of them are regularly foreign students who were not going to be attending this year. So it was really an economic as well as a medical problem. So they withdrew they were supposed to do the town hall meeting. The first one was going to be Notre Dame, but they had the same problem at Notre Dame, particularly because Notre Dame came up with this concept of starting the fall semester the 1st of August and run the students through to Thanksgiving without a break, not going back home, visiting grandparents and so forth, bringing back or bringing with them coronavirus problems. And if we were going to do the first debate at Notre Dame, we'd have had 5,000 reporters there from nations all over the world, which wouldn't do it. So they pulled out. But so we went by the work we did with the Cleveland Clinic. And every single person who was allowed in the hall had to be tested and passed that day or the day before. And every single person was to wear a mask. That went to the candidates, the entourages, and everyone. Now, normally, Bill, historically, our audiences for these debates have averaged about 1,000 to 1,200 people. But because of the requirements of spacing and so forth, we had just about 60 to 70 people in these halls, and all of the debates separated by appropriate social distance to 6 feet and to wear masks. Well, what happened right out of the box with the first debate, now, of course, the president, Vice President Biden, and the moderator would not wear masks, but everyone else was supposed to. Now, the first family came in wearing masks, came down and sat in the front row, and immediately when they sat down, they took their masks off and put them in their pockets. A doctor from the Cleveland Clinic approached them, handed out more masks, and suggested that they put them on. They refused and did not put them on, which was a real shock to us. I mean, we thought it was very, very clear what the rules were, and everyone had agreed to the rules. So when it came for the final debate, I made very clear to both sides that anyone who was in that hall who took off a mask and refused to put another one would be escorted out. Now that was difficult. First family is under the protection of the Secret Service, but we made it clear. I made it clear to the candidates. And I said on stage, normally what happens about 15 minutes before it's 9 o'clock on East Coast time, I'm on stage. I usually introduce the president of the university who says a few words, thanks to their sponsors and so forth. And I lay out the rules. And I made very clear in that final debate in Nashville that we would stop the debate and you will be escorted out. We'll stop the debate. You're going to embarrass whoever you're there to help and so forth. And I was very strong with it, and it worked. No one took their masks off, and it went fine. But we followed all the way through the advice of our medical advisors. Now, we came to a little problem the last day of the debate, in the Nashville debate, the very last debate. The suggestion of the Cleveland Clinic and Health Corporation of America, HCA, Tennessee, was that there be erected between the candidates a plexiglass barrier. One would be next to Vice President Biden, and one would be next to the president. And so we followed the suggestions and we erected those barriers. Now, when the walkthrough was done with the Vice President Biden that morning, he came in, he saw it, he didn't say anything. He had no problem with the plexiglass barrier, and they left. An hour and a half later, in came the vice president with his entourage, and he walked up and stood at the podium and looked over through the plexiglass to where former Vice President Biden was going to be, and he says, "This won't work. This can't work. This is wrong. This is wrong." He says, "Where's Frank Fahrenkopf? Where's Frank Fahrenkopf?" Well, I was down in the audience area. He says, "Come up here, please." Well, I wasn't happy. He didn't have a mask on then. But I walked up and he said, stand here at the podium." So I stood at the podium, And he was right. He was right. If I looked at that over where Biden was going to be, I saw my reflection in the plexiglass. I would also have seen Biden's, but I mean, that's very disturbing. And so this can't go. Frank, you've got to get these out of here. So as well, they're, you know, they're up there because of our medical advisors, and I will appropriately consult. So I know you can do it. And he turned to his entourage. He had everyone there. He had his wife, he had his kids, and so forth. He said, I've been arguing with Frank Fahrenkopf for 20 years. No problem. It's really not true. We always got along pretty well up until what he tried to do in St. Louis with the 3 women. I don't know if you remember back the town hall meeting in 2016. So Mark Meadows, who was the chief of staff, came down on the floor of the hall with me, where we had doctors from Health Corporation of America. And then he explained to us, Meadows, which we didn't know before, that the president had been tested on Air Force One on the way down, as we knew Biden was. Biden was also tested on the way down to Nashville, and both had tested negative. Well, we didn't know. I felt a little better then. And also that the president had had no signs whatsoever of contagious or illness for 21 days, well past the 10 days that normally was there. Well, the doctor from HCA was still a little nervous about this. So what we did is we got Dr. Anthony Fauci on the phone, believe it or not. Dr. Fauci said if he was tested positive, negative on the plane down, he hasn't had any symptoms, we know, for 21 days, he is no longer contagious. You don't need the plexiglass. And he said, by the way, the plexiglass isn't going to stop this virus. It'll go over the top or come around the sides. So we agreed to take it down, but then I had to go to the Biden side and talk with the Biden people. Ron Klain, who is going to be the next chief of staff for soon to be President Biden, said if Dr. Fauci says it's okay, he's the seal, the good homekeeping seal of approval, and we took down the plexiglass. And Bill, that was at 5:30 Eastern time, 2.5 hours before the debate was to begin. So that's some of the things that we go through in putting these things on.
Frank, putting on your hat as just for one question, as a political strategist, somebody who's watched a lot of and been involved in a lot of presidential campaigns, given the closeness of the results of the election, a lot of people have commented that maybe that first debate was really problematic for the president. What do you think about that?
You are right on. And I actually had a telephone conversation with Rudy Giuliani, and Rudy admitted to me what I said I thought. And I just said to him, if the president had conducted himself in the first debate like he did the last debate, he might very well be the president-elect right now. And Rudy Giuliani agreed. Now, what Rudy told me was that they overestimated Biden. They thought that they would have to go after him real hard in the first debate to trip him up and cause him to make mistakes and so forth. And that was a mistake. And my analysis of what happened after that first debate, the president lost a lot of senior voters in the country, both white, black, and brown, or whatever color they might be, because he came across as being rude. He wouldn't play by the rules. And even if they liked the net result of what he was doing from particularly an economic standpoint, he didn't act presidential. And I think that was one of the real reasons he lost. You know, it was a very, very close election, not in the general election, because, you know, gosh, I think that Joe got close to 80 million votes, and Trump got 72 million or something like that. I mean, it's the largest turnout in history. But it just turned off a lot of people who may not have liked him personally and the way he conducted himself, but liked what he was doing with the economy and so forth. And so my analysis is exactly what these people have indicated to you. I think the first debate was a major mistake and error by President Trump, and he paid the price for it.
The Commission on Presidential Debates was created back in, as you noted, back in the 80s, kind of in the Reagan era,
yes,
when there were still a lot of swing voters in the country. We're and it's bipartisan. We're hyper-partisan now in the country. What challenges, unique challenges, has that presented the commission in making decisions?
Well, thank goodness, we've had over the years a tremendous board of distinguished Americans, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and this will sound trite, Bill, but it's something that we've tried to live by. When we created the commission, Paul Kirk, a liberal Democrat from Massachusetts, and Frank Fahrenkopf, a conservative Republican from Nevada, we shook hands. And we said that whenever we were working on matters pertaining to the Commission on Presidential Debates, he would never wear a DNC hat. I would never wear an RNC hat. We would always wear USA hats. And I think the fact that we're still around, after 33 years or more, means that we've had a commission that has stuck to that pledge. We have rules. If you're on the commission, you cannot work on a campaign. We've had a couple of examples. For example, in 2016, Leon Panetta was a member of the commission, but he realized as a former head of the Defense Department, CIA, former White House Chief of Staff for Bill Clinton, that he was going to be called for interviews and so forth, so he stepped aside. Prior to that, Alan Simpson, a former senator from Wyoming, one of the funniest men who ever lived, was asked by Dick Cheney to fly on Air Force Two with him during the campaigns when Cheney was running with Bush. And Al had to step down because of that. One of our current members is Jane Harman. Jane Harman's a former Democratic Congresswoman from California. She runs the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. She was involved in things and interviews and so forth that she felt just uncomfortable, so she stepped down. So we tried to keep it so that you can't make a contribution, you can't work on a campaign, you can't take positions for either candidates or not. And that's how we've lived and we've survived.
You mentioned, Frank, when we were discussing debate formats, how much viewers like the town hall format. Could you just kind of address, based on what you've seen anecdotally and maybe research-wise over the years, the importance of debates to voters?
We have continually, there's two programs. And in fact, you have Barbara Ballard working there somewhere, right? I think
That's
Barbara
correct.
was working with us for our observer situation afterwards, Debate Watch, and where we tell everyone the minute the debate's over, click the sound off so you don't have to listen to the talking heads on television saying who won or lost. You can make up your own mind. But we also had a program where we have really analyzed what exit polls have been showing, because they've been asked, how did the debates affect the way you voted? And it's always been somewhere between 65 and 75% say that the debates were an important factor in how it wasn't the only factor, it wasn't the most important factor, but it was an important factor in how they finally made a decision as to who to vote for. And as you see the numbers, I mean, Nielsen ratings does not include C-SPAN. It also does not include those people who are watching the debate scanning on their computer or on their iPad or on their iPhone. It also doesn't count, if like at one time, the University of Notre Dame in 2016 put up a giant screen in the middle of one of the green area, and there were about 2,000 students were sitting there watching. That counted as one student because it was just the one screen. So we know that it was about 90 million people watched the first debate, and when you include in all the others that scanned and so forth, it was clear the first debate touched well over 100 million people saw that debate. And if debates don't matter, as some of the critics say, why did 100 million people watch? I mean, it is important. It may not be the most important, but it is an important factor.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. You mentioned a number of campaigns, general election campaigns, where the debates have been problematic. Can you point to any presidential cycles when it just seemed to flow really smoothly and working with the campaigns was easy, or is it normally kind of a trying process?
Well, there's always things that pop up. probably the easiest one was in 1996 when the founder, or the namesake of where you are, Bob Dole, was running against Bill Clinton. And what happened then is the numbers were overwhelmingly all through favoring Bill Clinton, that there wasn't much interest in the debate. It was the lowest ratings that we've had. And of course, Bob being Bob, also, we only had 2 presidential debates that year because there was a third one scheduled, but it was at a time when the United Nations was holding their annual meeting in New York, and they asked President Clinton to make a speech, and he accepted. And it was going to be the night before the debate. And Bob, being the great gentleman he is, he said, okay, we'll forget that one. But that was probably the easiest one. There's always little things that jump. For example, the first debate that we did was Michael Dukakis against George H.W. Now, you may remember that Mike Dukakis was about 5'6", if he was on his, standing on his tiptoes, while George Herbert Walker Bush was about 6'2". And we were using I'm trying to think for the word, when you're standing before the podiums, the podiums. And we normally had a rule that you wanted the top of the podium to hit about the second button on the shirt of the candidates. Well, Mike Dukakis would have to still pull himself up to get up. So again, we built a pitcher's mound. We built a pitcher's mound behind Mike Dukakis's podium, and George H.W. Bush agreed to it. So when Dukakis walked out, he just stepped up on that mound, and he was then equal with George Herbert Walker Bush at the podium, hitting him here. That also was an interesting debate for a couple of things. Bernie Shaw of CNN was the moderator there with, I can't remember, Andrea Mitchell. There were 3 women reporters who were the panelists. And before the debate started, I was back in the makeup room talking to the girls, and then over in the corner was Bernie Shaw, and he was angry. And I said, "What's the matter, Bernie?" He says, "Well, those women have ganged up on me. They say that I can only ask one question. They're going to ask the others, and they outvoted me, and so I'm over here trying to think of a good question." Well, if you remember what that question was to Michael Dukakis, it fundamentally was, you've said historically that you're against the death penalty. What if your wife was raped and murdered? Would you still be against it? And he said, "Bernard, yes, I still," very mechanical. It hurt him. It no compassion or anything else. So it hurt him dramatically. Another thing that happened that I will never forget was I always come out before it starts and tell the audience they're not to clap, they're not to make noise, they're not to cheer, please. There are millions of people watching this on television trying to make a decision. And if you're interrupting their thought patterns, you're not being a fair American, and so forth. So we were in Hollywood. It was at UCLA, and there was a lot of Hollywood stars there. And across the aisle from where I was sitting, and when I came back from making that speech, just as the debate was going to start, I looked over, and Sally Field, the actress, was sitting right across and she gave me a nasty look. And at the first time that Dukakis gave an answer, Sally Field put her 2 pinky fingers in her mouth and let out the loudest whistle. I mean, that girl could whistle. And she just glared at me. So, she gave me, rather than giving me the proverbial finger, she gave me the whistle. And some years later, I remember when she won the Academy Award, I was with my wife, and she walked across the stage and clutched the Oscar, and she said, "You love me, you like me." And I said, I raised my hand at home and said, "I don't like you," because I never forgot that. So there's always little things that pop up that you don't expect. But by and large, although I must say, Bill, in the early years, you may remember, we started in '88, there was always the question of the debate about the debate. And we then sat down with representatives of both sides and tried to pick moderators and tried to figure out the formats and all the rest. That was impossible. And it was very, very combative at times. Starting in 2000, we said, that's over. So right now, without any consultation with the candidates and with no consultation with the parties, we picked the dates, we picked the locations, we picked the moderators, and we picked the formats. And there's some grumbling always, but it's worked well and made our life a lot simpler in putting on these debates.
What would you say are the key lessons that the commission has learned over the 30 plus years it's been around about debates?
That's a really good question. I'm asked a lot. I do a lot of speaking at universities, and I do a lot for the State Department, believe it or not, going to our embassies abroad. What have you learned? What have you learned? And what I've learned is that the American people want to like their president. They want to like their president. They want to feel pride in their president. They're not necessarily going to vote for who they think is the smartest or the best or the best debaters. And I remember in 2000, it was during the town hall meeting, and I don't know if you remember, but when it was Bush's time to answer a question, and he was turning around looking at some of the people that were there in the bleachers at the town hall meeting, and Al Gore walked over and sort of stood right in front of him and glared at him like he was gonna, and Bush just looked at him and gave a little shrug and a smile and laughed and went on. And I thought that hurt Al. I thought it hurt Al. It showed rudeness. And that's why I say that first debate, the way the president handled himself, showed the American that they didn't like him. Now, in 2016, we had a very unusual case for the first time. In 2016, the American people didn't like either candidate. I mean, neither one of them was up over 50% approval going into that election. As many people did dislike Trump as they did Hillary. So that was the first time we had that situation. But this time, even before this acting up, I mean, Joe Biden didn't do anything that he was disliked. Most people who know Joe, he's a very likable guy. Now, there was some questions raised as to whether or not he was the Joe Biden of old and as sharp as he used to be, but he's a likable human being. And I think the president conducted himself in such a fashion, he really hurt himself unnecessarily.
What would you say the commission's greatest accomplishments have been during its existence, Frank?
Well, we always approach this bill as an educational function. That's why we do it on university campuses. If you ever consult with a campus president who's done a debate, most of them, I would say 90%, want another one, because what it's done is for a full year, because they know a year in advance, they've had special programs developed, the political science departments and so forth, studying, getting to the questions which we don't see much in K through 12, teaching civics, how things work, the history of the country, and so forth. So I think that's been a very, very important part of the function that we do. And I think we also focus these debates now, the campaigns now, particularly with social media. My goodness, it used to be, most people got their news by watching David Brinkley and Chet, what was his name? Chet Huntley Brinkley, or they watch Walter Cronkite or so forth. And that's the way they got their news and they read their newspapers. Well, now, particularly among younger people, they don't watch the news on television. It's on their computer. It's social media. And there's so much that you can like about it, and there's so much that's false, and a lot that's true. So it's very hard to get through all of that, I think, for the average voter. But I think, at least with our debates, we're focusing very clearly on specific issues that we want to try to get across. But and again, like I say, we've been successful enough to survive this long. Hopefully, we'll do it in the future. Although we may have to make some changes.
What do you think is the future of presidential debates under the commission?
I think we plan on doing it in 2024. If I'm around, I may not be around then. I'm going to suggest some modifications. I have a feeling, and I'm sure with your political background, you probably agree, this voting by mail and early voting, it will not end with the coronavirus. I think a lot of people found it a lot easier to vote from home, assuming it's all fair, and I've not seen anything at this point in time to show widespread fraud or anything, as the president claims. At least I haven't seen it up to this point, and apparently the Attorney General of the United States hasn't, and a lot of courts around the country. But it's just a lot easier to do it that way, assuming that the machines are going to be fine to how they tally the mail-in ballots. But because of that, I think clearly we're going to have to move some of the debates back earlier. I think that it worked out that the first debate this time was on the 29th. I may be off a day, I don't have it all right in front of me, of September. We found at that point in time that a lot of ballots had been mailed out. They started being mailed out about 10 days before, on the 19th. Now, we also did a lot of research on early voting. And that research at the university, a professor down at the University of Florida has done a tremendous job. And he found that there are two types of people who are getting mailing ballots. There's those who've made their mind up. They're partisan. They know who they're going to vote for, and no debate or anything else is going to change their mind. They get that ballot, they mark it, put the stamp on it, and it's out immediately. But the vast majority of people don't do that. They hold on to the ballot. They watch television, they watch the debates and so forth. And it's usually the last 2 or 3 weeks before the election that they mail in their ballots. And in fact, the first debate in 2016 was, I think, on the 27th, 2 days before, and it was 0.006% of voters had voted, already sent in their ballots. So, but I think in the future, we're going to have to move the debates forward and into September, if what I guess is true, that mail voting, mail ballots is something that we're going to see continue.
Okay, well, Frank, that's all the questions I have today. I want to thank you so much for joining the Dole Institute virtual post-election conference. We greatly appreciate it. It was a fascinating and splendid look at the history of the debate commission and what's likely to happen in the future. And we very much appreciate your time.
Happy to be here, Bill.
Okay, thanks to everyone for joining us, and please join us for our next session of the Dole Institute virtual post-election conference. Thank you all.